Well, good morning. I figured since you were comfortable, I ought to be comfortable too this morning. And we've been in a series, just a very short one, on this idea of rethinking church. And talking about where, as a pastoral staff, we've been praying and thinking and kind of wrestling with what's sort of the next step for us. What's the thing? And today's kind of taking where we've already been, but also kind of going a little bit different way. But to sort of set it up, I'm going to just tell you a little bit of a couple of stories from my life. And they all come from one church I pastored. And I want to preface it by saying, not the worst church I ever pastored, okay? And you'll understand why I say that in just a moment. Very first Sabbath there, had a lobby. And it was a little bit of an old school church, and you had a welcome book that you signed in. And I had just gotten there, and I was standing around the lobby, kind of greeting people, introducing myself. And there was an older lady, I'd come to find out later, 80-year-old lady, that was standing by the welcome table in this big book they wanted you to sign up. And she says to me, "You ought to sign the book." To which I said, "Well, I'm the new pastor here, and, you know, it doesn't make sense for me to sign a book." But she was very insistent, so I said, okay, so I signed the book. To which she looked at it, and she said to me, "You know, when I was in high school, I took a handwriting analysis class. And according to this, if I remember right, this says you're stingy and selfish." And there was probably some other words at that moment I had sort of just checked out. Again, not the worst church I ever pastored. Very first Sabbath there. Same church. After a potluck one day, we were, potluck is one of these, if you're not familiar with this sort of this free-for-all food thing that happens at some churches. And we were kind of standing in this line, and this very caring lady came up to Lori, my wife, who our oldest son was about a little over a year old at this time, and she was either just pregnant or not quite pregnant yet with our second son. And this very loving lady came up to her, put her hand on her shoulder, and said, "Are you pregnant, or do you just need to do some sit-ups?" Again, not the worst church I've ever pastored. Third story, because I'm going to limit it to 3 this morning. We're at a church board meeting, and they're having a discussion, and there was a discussion about this women's seminar or retreat conference thing that was coming up. And so the lady that was sort of heading it up was talking to the board about it, and they were wondering who might be interested in going and who they ought to invite. And somebody said, "Well, you ought to invite Lori," my wife Lori, to which this lady said, "Do you think she's spiritual enough to go on this?" Again, not the worst church I've ever pastored. And I tell you that this morning because I'm guessing that for a lot of you, you could tell similar stories of churches, of experiences of what I would call thoughtless people, that in most of those cases they were thoughtless. They just hadn't thought about how it was going to sound when it came out, whether they were trying to be nicely encouraging or actually had some questions or just were kind of clueless to how relationships in life ought to go there. The majority of people I've ever run into are just sort of that way. They're thoughtless. There's a few people that are intentionally mean and nasty, and that's a whole other topic for another day. But here's the reality. Here's the reality that I've come to. People are messy. And as a paid professional Christian, I get the pleasure and the joy of meeting lots of messy people. And here's what I've discovered for myself, and I'm guessing for some of you this has been the result of having some of those less than stellar conversations take place. And that's this, that our hearts are always in danger of growing smaller and harder. When somebody says that thing that just kind of, it's easy to kind of, if we don't physically step away inside, just to kind of distance ourselves. And there's a problem with that. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today, about the problem with that. But before we go any farther, let's just stop for a moment and ask God to be in this place to help us talk about this messy stuff, all right? Father, I just stop to remind myself that not only are you in this place this morning, you were with me when I woke up, you were with me when I slept, you were with me when I've had those great conversations and great experiences, and you've been with me when some of those messy conversations have happened. And I just pray today as we talk about some of these things, that for myself, that again you'd work on my heart, that you'd change my heart, that you'd protect my heart, so that it doesn't grow smaller, doesn't grow harder to the realities of life. And I pray that you'll do it for all of us here today, to again grasp this idea of what grace is. It's not just something we get to experience, but it's something that we get to share, that we get to live. And that can only happen if you're present in a clear and powerful way in our lives. So just use this time now to do what only you can do. And that's to change us again. Amen. You may want to write this down. Here's a conclusion I have from 30 plus years of pastoring. Broken people act broken because, ta-da, they are. And I remind myself of that fairly regularly, because if I don't remind myself regularly, it's easy to look at somebody who's broken, who's messy, who is exhibiting their messiness in all different sorts of ways, and say, what an idiot. Now, I'm not discounting the fact that they could be an idiot this morning, all right? I'm simply saying it's important to keep a big picture in mind. Because you can't expect a non-broken person to act like a broken person. And you can't expect a broken person to act like a non-broken person. And here's the truth of the matter is, we're all in process. Every one of us sitting here today. And that's a very uncomfortable place. Because I would love everybody to be in the process at the same place that I'm in the process. Because that would make life so much easier, right? And I'm guessing for you, you have that same kind of, it would be great if everybody was at the same stage you were. In fact, I was listening to something a while back, I don't remember where it was at, and they were saying that you think about all the friends you have. I'll give you for a moment. Think about all the friends, the people that are really part of your life. There's probably somebody, at least one person in your life that's a messy person. Don't look at him right this moment, just keep looking at me, right? Trying to save some stuff later. But right there's at least, everybody can agree there's probably one person that's messy in your life, right? And as you look at your friends, you believe something about yourself. You believe you're the normal one in that whole group. Which means you have some friends that you think are, much better than you, that are, really got it all together. You got some other friends that you are just sure, you're convinced, and it doesn't take much study to figure that out. They don't have their stuff together at all. But all of us, and this is what this person was talking about, all of us see ourselves as the normal person in all the relationships. Which, if we step back from that for just a moment, ought to kind of scare us, right? But it's how we see things. And we can forget when we're thinking we're the normal one, that everybody's at a process, that everybody's in a different place. And because everybody's in a different place, things get messy. Things don't always work out the way we wish they would. And the reality is, all of us are broken. We're broken by our own sin. Somebody say amen. Amen. Don't leave me up here all by myself this morning. But we're all broken by our own sin. You lie about something, you feel bad about it, but if you don't do anything about that lie, if you don't sort of go own it, then the next time, you know what? It's a little easier. A little easier. And then it becomes a habit and a pattern, and because it becomes a pattern, you begin then to believe it's part of normal, and it's just sort of who you become. And it's a brokenness that all of us carry. But not only are we broken by our own sin, we're broken by the sins of others. And the reality is, some of us in this room today are more broken than others, and that doesn't mean sort of a category, you're worse. It's just the reality that because of what's happened in your life, there's a lot more broken stuff. But everybody is broken. And because everybody's broken, it's important to remind ourselves that we're all in this process. And that healing really is a journey that takes time. And let's be honest, we don't like the fact that it takes time. Right? I mean, our whole culture is built on not waiting for anything. Businesses go out of business every day of the year because they're stuck in here and they haven't been able to make the changes because now people need that stuff quicker and they'll find it quicker. I mean, you could sit here this morning and you could basically run your life. You could take out your phone, your tablet, you could pay your bills, you could go see what the latest news is. Hopefully none of you are tuning into the World Cup. It's all there. We have to remind ourselves that we didn't get here overnight, and sometimes we're not going to get back overnight. And to allow ourselves the not only the luxury, but the benefit, the reality of saying, sometimes things take time. And one of the things I think we sometimes have done poorly as leaders or pastors is we've kind of get this idea to people that, you accept Jesus and everything is just sort of this upward shot, And the reality is that life is nothing like that. Your life hasn't been like that. My life hasn't been like that. And as much as we can say we wish it was like that, it's not like that, and we ought to be honest, it's not like that. That sometimes it's not only up, sometimes it's literally like falling off a cliff. Sometimes it's going around and around and around and around. But we're all in this process, and healing really takes some time. But here's the reality. Life shapes us, but God reclaims us. And that is really what the whole message of the Bible is about. I mean, what I love about the Bible is it has these stories about people's lives where life really shaped them. They did some stupid stuff, made some poor choices. They got shaped, but God was able to step in and to reclaim that situation when they recognized their need of God. And even the people that made wonderful decisions in the Bible, these great sort of models for us to say, stand strong, make good decisions, be willing to take the risk. Even that shapes them. And God reclaims that even for himself through all that. I saw this post on a friend's Facebook page this week. I have no idea who Jose N. Harris is, but here's what he said. Some people live in a bitter, angry, hate-filled world. And you probably know people like that. None of you here today are like that because you are all just loving, caring people. But there are some people, strange enough, that live like this, live in a bitter, angry, hate-filled world. Some people live in a friendly, caring, love-filled world. And you probably know people like that. And here's the amazing thing. It's the same world, right? What makes the difference? What makes the change from living sort of this bitter, angry, hate-filled world and this friendly, caring, love-filled world? There's this thing I think about attitude and about perspective. But for those of us who consider ourselves Christians, who are followers of Jesus, people that are moving with Jesus, reminded again of sort of this high, not only call God puts in our life, not only high expectation he puts in our life, but the invitation to live a life that's different, that's out of the norm, that's a step beyond for a greater purpose. One day, Jesus is talking here in Luke chapter 6, and he makes this statement. He says, listen, guys, this is what I say to all who will listen to me. And I have to imagine a couple of disciples sitting there, and one of them gets the elbow to the other guy and says, hey, this is going to be on the test when he says stuff like that. When he says, this is for those that are really willing to listen to me, really willing to take that next step. He says, so we got to pay attention here. And here's what Jesus says. If you want to listen to me, you need to love your enemies. And the word love here is that agape love, this idea that we got to really care about. We got to love them like we love our best friend. It's not like kind of tolerating them, putting up with them, being courteous to them when we're in the same room, even though we want to strangle them, but we're just going to smile, good to see you, kind of thing. He said, that's not what I'm talking about. You need to love your enemies. Great news about this. Jesus recognizes that we have enemies. And that ought to be good news to some of us. Jesus is honest about that. You have enemies. I have enemies. But we're to love them, he says. Not only that, he says, and to be good to everyone who hates you. Not just the people you hate, but the ones that hate you. It's one of those passages I wish Jesus never spoken, and they've never been written down, you know? Because I don't like the idea that I'm supposed to do something for the people that I don't like and that don't like me. Why can't we just go our separate ways? And I have to imagine the disciples hear this, they're like, did you just hear what he said? Well, we gotta love these people. We gotta care about these people. How is that possible? And we gotta be good. We gotta be nice to the people that don't like us. And Jesus bumps it up even more. He says, listen, ask God to bless anyone who curses you. Now, this is different from the prayers that you and I probably normally pray. I'm guessing some of us pray for those that we consider our enemies, those messy people in life, those irritants in our life. And our prayer, if your prayer is like mine, it typically goes like this. God be with beep, because I'll blank it out so I don't say any names here. Beep. Help change their heart. Change their life. Make them more loving. Make the connection. Fix them. Bless them, Lord. I want you to bless them, but bless them in a way that changes them so that we don't have this issue. And while that's how I pray, and I'm guessing some of you pray the same prayer, that is not what Jesus is talking about here. He's saying just to pray for them, to ask God to bless them. No hands on it. Just simply to bless them. There's no sort of bless them in this way or that way. Just God, bless them. Bring happiness to their life. While they don't bring happiness in my life, God, bring happiness to their life. Just do good for them. And to pray for everyone who is cruel to you. Not the easiest thing in the world to do. But here's the reality, and we talked about this last week, and I'm bringing it back again. Love makes us do things we wouldn't otherwise do. See, isn't a directive from God to go home and make up a list, begin to try to love them, begin to pray for them, begin to bless them, do all this kind of stuff. It's not about an actions that we have to go through a list. When Jesus says these things, he's reminding us that we have to have a whole change of heart, a whole different perspective on life. And to recognize that love, that his love that gets placed in us, makes us do things that we wouldn't normally do. Paul will grab it this way in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. He would say, listen, the love of Christ compels us, it drives us, it pushes us, and it pulls us. The love of Christ compels us because we're convinced of something. We're convinced that one died for all, and so all have died. Now, today we think about that idea of one died for all, we've all died. How does that compel us? And Paul says, listen, when we stop and think about what God offers to us through the death of Jesus, that it's there to not only get us a chance to get to heaven someday, it's more about what happens today. And what God wants to do in our lives today. That it's that breaking. It's that changing. It's that molding. It's that directing and driving us in a different way. He'll go on to say, listen, Christ died for all, so those who live would not continue to live for themselves. He died for us to kind of die that thing that it's no longer about me, 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 me. It doesn't mean it's never about me, but it's no longer me, 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 me. But for him who died for them and was raised from the dead. It's about changing our patterns, changing our directions, changing the things that we hope and dream about. And he says, when this gets a hold of us, it literally compels us, it literally drives us to do things differently. That love causes us to do things we normally wouldn't do. And he said, listen, here's the result. You want to know how this affects? As a result, we do not think of anyone from a merely human perspective anymore. In other words, we don't see others as, this race or that race. We just look at everybody as one big happy family now. Some of you just have year-round tans and some of us don't. Some of us have different stuff we bring to the table. Some of us bring other stuff to the table. But everybody is in this together. That we no longer says, oh, they're this or they're that. We now consider each other something else. And here's what he says. That if anyone belongs to Christ, that person has become a new creation. And I love the word here. The word new literally means a fresh creation, an unused creation, an unworn creation. How many of you have an item of clothing at home that is more than 6 months old that you have never worn? How many of you have one that's more than a year old that you've never worn? How many of you have something you've never worn and you don't know how old it is, but you have never worn it? And it's probably because it has some kind of meaning to you, right? That you're keeping it for something special. You bought it for this occasion, didn't happen, and when this next time it happens, a wedding, when my kids get married, that's when I'm going to wear it. Or it's that kind of favorite kind of thing, or it's that unused, and if I use it, then it's going to change the whole thing. And that's the picture that the Bible describes for us. That with this brand new, this unused, unworn, fresh creation. So Paul says, listen, when we look at each other, Jesus' love compels us to look at each other as something that's fresh, something that's not worn down, something that's not something that just simply needs a new paint or coat, a new coat of paint, or a wash and a wax. Something's that brand new. And if you've ever had something brand new, say you had a brand new car, you ever notice how well you take care of that when you first get it? You probably actually wash it regularly, vacuum it regularly. But then that day comes. You know, you're going through the drive-in, and it's a busy, crazy day, and you got to eat on the run, and you eat on the run, and you get stuff dropped in the seats, and the fries drop down between those seats, and you never can reach those fries, and so, 6 months, a year later, you discover this little fuzzy thing down there, it's really hard, or you spill your drink, and at that moment, this car that you have taken such great care of becomes a used car. And it's amazing how your mind changes on it, isn't it? And Paul says, we got to look at this as that brand new and how well we take care of it. And if we're a brand new creation, this is fresh and new. It's like a little baby, and a little baby you take care of. You give room to grow. You give space for things to take place. And I say all that for this simple reason. Our goal for this church is to be a place, and our emphasis is changing a little bit, and our emphasis is now focusing more on you than on us. And what I mean by that is that we're coming to the conclusion that the way we're going to make the biggest impact is not just by having some big events here, not getting a name for this church building here. We're going to get a name not for ourselves, but for God through you. As we said last week, you're the church. This isn't the church, you're the church. And because of that, this is kind of our motto we're adopting, this idea that we're here to help all of us to be real, life-functioning followers of Jesus wherever we are. We've been talking about sharing your faith, and Pastor Jason said a couple weeks ago, and I reiterated last week, we will never ask you to share your faith for one simple reason. You already are. And the question we have to do, a regular reminder for all of us is the faith that you're sharing the faith you want to be sharing to the people around you? And so our goal has to go to focus on helping all of us to become real life functioning followers of Jesus wherever we're at. Not just when we show up at church and we smile and look at Brad. Hey, Brad, how you doing? Good to see you. Smile on our face. Everything's great, But to be a real life functioning follower of Jesus, when you're in that shopping line and you're checking out, in that quickie lane, that's supposed to have 9 items or less, and you're clear that person has like 25 items in that basket, and they're on their phone while they're going through, and they're just they're just killing you, at that moment, to be a real life functioning follower of Jesus. When you're sitting at your cubicle, and your lovely cubicle mate always cooks that food that just, you can't stand the smell, or they're always on their phone, or they're always got their music, or they're always got something going on. We're reminding ourselves that being a follower of Jesus is a all-the-time thing. It's not just a weekend thing, not just a being at home thing, but it's an everywhere thing. And because of this, our goal is to help you experience whenever you come, and whether this is your first time or your 100th time or however many times here, we want to always continue to be this place, and even more so, help you experience a place to change rather than requiring you to change before finding a place. We want to help you belong here. We want to make you part of us even maybe before you're part of us. Maybe before you're, we don't have any, entry exams when you come into this place. Nobody stands at our doors and says this morning, really, you wore that today? Did you really even think before you left home? Did you not kind of look in a mirror? Nobody's going to do that here. Why? Because this needs to be a place where you can come experience change versus saying you got to get changed before you show up. And if you're here for the first time and you've been kind of afraid or scared, or maybe your third or fourth time, and every time you kind of wonder if the roof's going to fall in because, your story. Good news is it hasn't fallen through yet. And we don't expect it to fall through. Because God knows everything already about your life. And I have to imagine God has a smile on his face today because you're sitting here. And whether it's the first time or 100th time, God has a smile. Because he is thrilled when people can have a chance to come and just be in a place like this. And here's what we're kind of looking at. I want you to know that you're not alone in your desire to find hope in your life. That's one of the good things about coming to some place like this. That you're not alone in this process. Everybody's looking for some way to kind of make sense out of life, to feel a sense of direction and meaning. So you're not alone in what we're doing. Secondly, coming to New Hope, you're able to be part of a crowd. You get to be anonymous. And that's okay. Some of us just need a place to kind of come and kind of hang out and check it out before we're ready to say, oh, look at me. That's why I don't put those little lovely little things on your, on your shirt when you come in today, on your blouse. How many of you ever had that joy of going to a church and they stick one of those little roses or something on you? Anybody remember that kind of stuff? Isn't that great? I remember when I first started going to, I was in the process of kind of checking out church and stuff. I always thought it was like putting a target on me, it's like we can always figure out who the visitor. Oh yeah, you're not one of them. Oh, it just. So you can come, you can be just part of the crowd. We are glad for that. We're glad. I'm glad you're here. Lastly, we want this to be a safe place. It has been a safe place, and we are going to continue to make this place a safe place. And at times, to make some place a safe place, we're going to have to make some people that maybe aren't safe to understand this needs to be a safe place. Because I don't want you to have the kind of experiences I've had. Those kind of ouchy, hurt, painful kind of things. But let me say something up front here. You are always going to have some ouchy, hurty experiences around a group of people. Do you know why? Because all of us at times say thoughtless things. Right? And we need to be real about this. To expect people never to fail you is an illogical, oxymoronic view of life. And I can prove it to you. How many times do you ever let yourself down? Why would you expect anybody else not to do it? But our goal is that when we have sort of people that are out of control, to remind them to be in control. Because we want this to be a safe place for all of us. A place you can come, a place you can be, a place you can find and sort of discover the things that need to take place in life. Ezekiel has this great promise from God when he simply says, listen, I'll give you a new heart, and I will put a new way of thinking inside of you. Because it's not just about a heart. We know we've got to have a change of our minds as well. God says, I'm going to do this. I'll give you a new heart, a new way of thinking, and I'll take out of you your heart of stone. And I'll give you this obedient heart of flesh. God's promise for you today and for me today is that he's willing to come and work on the stuff in here and in here that gets so affected and so impacted by all the stuff around us And as we close today, I simply want to invite you to ask God to make your heart grow larger and softer for people. Because, as I said before, it's always in danger of growing smaller and harder. With that in mind, I invite you to take out a thing in your program today called a Connect card. And I invite you just to fill it in with whatever information you're comfortable giving us. You know, if you've always been coming to New Hope and say, well, I don't need that information, humor me, be an encouragement to somebody around you, fill those things out. And every week we're going to have a chance to sort of take a next step. And this may not be a next step that fits for you, and that's okay. But here's our next steps today. Maybe today your next step is to simply to ask God to let Jesus' love move you in his direction. Whatever that direction is, but moving in his direction. Or maybe your next step today is to ask God to make your heart grow larger and softer towards others. And if that's the next step you need to take today, I encourage you to make that step. To move it from saying yes up here to yes here. And allow God to do something in and through that process. And as you fill it out in a little bit, some guys will come down to pick that up. They'll pick that card up along with an offering. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Next Sabbath, we kick off a whole summer series, message series called 60-60. And this summer, we're inviting you to experience a new way to connect with God. So we're going to kick that up. Next week is very important. If you're going to miss any of them, don't miss next week, because we're going to lay the ground, the simple process that will change and impact your life in a way that you can't expect. For something so simple and so easy. So next week, I hope you'll come to that. If you know somebody that's kind of trying to experience God and is kind of said, you know, I'm kind of tired of hearing about everybody else's story with God. I'd like to have something. We encourage you to invite them to come next week. As I said, they'll pick those Connect cards up with our offerings today. Offerings are just simply funds that people that consider New Hope their home to support, a way to support all the things that happen around here. So we thank you for that. You can give, here today. You can go online to give. You can do by mail. But again, we thank you for that. Dave Wooster is going to come up and talk a little about some community life, some stuff happening here. And also he's going to talk about our other offering that will take place just before those folks come down and pick up the card and offering. Come on up, Dave.